So a guy named Tony Skeptical made a video that supposedly debunks Outer Goku. So let's just get to the point and see what he has to say.
To start us off, let's use the, in my opinion, strongest arguments for Outer Goku, which seem to come from Koyama himself.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Regardless to whether or not this is your opinion, we really don't need Koyama for any scaling at all.
This section is going to be going over the numerous guides that have popped up regarding the cosmology of Dragon Ball. We'll mainly be looking at this one, this one, this one, this guide, and finally, this scan. For the RPG guide, it has a shit ton of misinformation, like, not even kidding. For example, Frieza having a power level of 500,000, or saying that the Saiyans actually destroyed planet Vegeta.
Nowhere in that scan implies the Saiyans were the cause for their planet's destruction. What it's actually saying is that their violent nature causes war among other species from other worlds in which we can obviously point out to be Frieza, who was actually the one who destroyed their planet. Thus, not a contradiction.
Higher dimension statement within both the RPG guide and several other guides that say the exact same thing. Okay, well, what backs this up? As mentioned before, for the sake of this video, I only mention things that have at least two separate sources stating the exact same thing. For example, let's use this scan that states a supernatural world in the hands of the gods, higher than the heavens, transcending dimensions that cannot be perceived from the human world. The gods of the kingdom of heaven look down on the world from this land. Then let's use this stated by Koyama in response to a question that asks, thank you for your time. You said that the afterlife is four-dimensional. What is the supreme world of the god? Also, if the DD time is constant in the universe and other universes in Dragon Ball Super, is it 5D? If not, what is it? And Koyama states the world above 5D. Now, the afterlife cannot lack the concept of space and time while having a dimensional area. Most Outerversal definitions go somewhat like this. Characters are objects that can affect structures with a number of dimensions equal to the cardinal Aleph 2, which in practical terms also equals a level that completely exceeds low 1A or low Outerversal structures to the same degree that they exceed high 1B or high Hyperversal and low. This can be extrapolated into larger cardinal numbers as well, such as Aleph 3, Aleph 4, and so on, and works in much the same way as 1C, complex multiversal, and 1B, hyperversal in that regard. Characters that stand an infinite number of steps above baseline 1A, baseline Outerversal, are to have the plus modifier in their attack potency section. However, other sites have different definitions, like from Character Stats and Profiles, which says characters that have no dimensional limitation are beyond the scientific definition thereof. Basically, a being or an object which is above and beyond the concept of space. Things that would be considered this tier would usually, but not always, be something that is completely formless, abstract, and transcendental. The usual scale does not make sense for beyond dimensional objects. Such beings cannot be affected by destruction within the confines of space, physical matter, or energy. This completely debunks the afterlife having a lack of conceptual time and or space, and furthermore, the argument for the Outerversal afterlife. The concept of time does exist, but this concept has no effect on the souls of the dead in heaven and in the afterlife in general. Basically, this lack of conceptual time can mean literally anything. It could mean that the idea of time has no effect in a fourth dimension, since you could argue the fourth dimension is time, perhaps existing in perpetual eternity. Or you could argue that time, or even the idea of the passage of time, has no effect on souls, since they are effectively immortal and eternal as well. So this doesn't back up Outerversal Goku.
So you state that something can't lack the concept of time if it has a dimensional area. What you're saying is that this forms a contradiction. The problem is you're making a misconception of Koyama's claim. For one, Koyama has stated that the afterlife is in fact timeless and dimensionless. What he means by the afterlife being above the five-dimensional scale is essentially an implication that the afterlife is beyond the dimensional scales of the living realm as it scales to 5D, not that the afterlife is dimensional.
Is simply put a world where time has no effect or hold. This would also fit within the explanation Goku gives about the afterlife. The afterlife is the fourth dimension. The fifth dimension is the universe 7 world, like the entire macrocosm, and the sixth dimension is just a separated world of the gods. Now, you may be wondering, Tony, what about those scans that say the afterlife lacks conceptual time? For one, they clearly talk about time within this realm that doesn't even have its concept, which literally makes no sense.
The mention of time in the afterlife doesn't entail that time exists in the afterlife. The mention of time in the afterlife refers to, and only refers to, the ideation of time. This is concluded by the fact that time doesn't exist there.
Goku and all these lower-tiered characters who are barely planetary just bypass this realm, not having the concept of time. Does the word concept mean something different in this world? However, I have seen some use the whole, but Goku wasn't used to Super Saiyan 3 in the Kai realm, so that means the Kai realm has time. I've seen this repeated so many times, and for a while I thought it was a decent point, but after rereading the manga, I discovered the main reason as to why Goku was losing so much energy, and it's actually quite simple. Goku was, and get this, not used to his living body. Well, I know, right? Which is why Vegeta seems to keep coming back when he gets beaten down by Boo. Like, seriously, this was brutal. This could also explain that the only reason why Super Saiyan 3 works in the first place is because of two factors: a realm without time and an immortal body, something both the Afterlife and Dead Goku have. Though this is just my headcanon and not really supported by the source material, mostly anyway, but this is the only reasonable explanation that takes both sides and comes to an answer that makes the most amount of sense. You could also just argue that the universe is the fourth dimension and that the afterlife just holds four-dimensional spaces.
You have no actual clue what you're talking about, and you're just pulling false interpretations out of your ass? King Kai distinguishes the difference between the living realm and the afterlife by stating that the living realm is the corporeal world, verbatim stating that the afterlife is in contrast to that. and non-corporeal meaning non-physical. So the afterlife cannot have spatial dimensions. This would also mean that the afterlife cannot have temporal dimensions, as space and time are an intertwined thing. The existence of a spatial dimension will allow the progression of events.
No temporal dimension, while the universe has 3 spatial dimensions with 1 temporal dimension, which would kind of make sense. Perhaps the living world is a Minkowski space, but since the higher spatial dimensions of the afterlife and the world of the gods contain no time, these are actually just straight up higher spatial dimensions. Instead of being a 3-to-1 ratio for space and time, it would just be 4 spatial dimensions. This can also explain why both the living world and the afterlife can be considered 4th dimensional.
You just contradicted your own argument that the afterlife is a world above the 5th dimensional world via Koyama.
One is actually just a Minkowski space, and the other is simply a higher spatial dimension. And so, given the fact that 3 different sources give us one similar answer, we can safely say without a doubt the Dragon Ball Macrocosm is 4th to 7th dimensional, depending on how you want to scale it. The world of the living is, however, called a temporal world, where time and the flow of time exist in chronological order. To further prove this, the afterlife is called a world without time, again within the manga. Energy drainage is by all means a process of events, movement, and moments in time that succeed one another, and this requires time, obviously. Goku is simply saying that this realm he's in operates without the flow of time, or maybe even time in general. Maybe those people that said that Goku was inaccessible in Z weren't all that crazy. Now, this would surely qualify for Outerversal tiering, right? Surprisingly, no. At least not according to any qualifying tiering website like Versus Battle Wiki, Character Stats and Profiles, or even Omniversal Battle Week. I couldn't even find one definition of Outerversal that would qualify the World of Void for this. The only apology I found was from Atari HMB, who doesn't even believe in Outerversal Goku in the first place. Now, I do not agree with this interpretation, but again, lacking conceptual time and space doesn't necessarily qualify for outer status. In fact, going by Versus Battle Wiki's definition of Outerversal, simply lacking conceptual time and space does not qualify for Tier 1A.
Nobody argued that the concepts of space and time being absent is qualified for outer. It's the fact that these concepts are not just absent within the afterlife, but also the fact that the afterlife transcends these concepts as well, via transcending the living realm, which does have space and time, and thus it qualifies for outer.
However, be considered a beyond dimensional existence type 1. This one is actually pretty easy to debunk, as we've already gone over this a line of logic before. This comes from the Super Exciting Guide, which backs up the numerously stated claim that the afterlife lacks the concept of time. This would, again, just be an instance of the afterlife lacking conceptual time, not necessarily being above it. For instance, even affecting an infinite number of higher mathematical dimensions would only be high hyperversal at best. So Jigen is not the concept of dimensionality. It is simply more than Kojigen, which is higher dimension or dimensions. So
the outer scaling notions doesn't necessarily have to be limited by the term concept. And here's a full disclosure on why Chojigen is outer. Anyways, this guy sucks. If he wants to debate personally, I'd be happy to. Peace, everyone.